Drug smugglers from Nicaragua have been declared by the President of the United States to be international terrorists. They're on a list of legitimate targets for our military and law enforcement. And that's how you treat targets. You don't negotiate with them. You don't put them up in luxury hotels. You don't ask for their permission to, negotiate. The theme of what's going on right now, and I know that so much has become politicized, but that's because so much has become politicized. These guys are designated terrorists. They are seen packing their boat with fentanyl. Very dangerous stuff is fentanyl. It kills hundreds of thousands of Americans. I don't have to tell you this because you're an expert on drug addiction. If you don't even accept the premise that Americans benefit from America being the strongest country in the world, we're not having the same conversation.
I'm honored today to have with us attorney Ron Coleman, who is erudite, sophisticated, articulate, and knowledgeable. And that's a nice combination. Good looking as well, obviously. And he's an attorney. He's very commonly found on the social medias. And I find him on x.com at, I don't know, maybe Ron Coleman or something like that. He'll tell us. And Ron's one of my go-to guys for a sensible conversation and from a legal perspective and international as well. So Ron, a lot of things happening in the news. I'll let you pick and choose. We kind of have, maybe have an idea of what I'm looking for, but tell us what's on top of your mind in the world affairs.
Well, you and I talked briefly before we got on about the feigned outrage over the use of the military to, as they say, neutralize a gunboat that was it a gunboat? I don't think it was actually a gunboat. It was a smuggling boat that was being used, that was known to be being used, not suspected. The government, the United States government, saw drugs being fentanyl. Fentanyl, you know how little fentanyl you need to kill a human being. This boat had a lot more fentanyl on it than that amount. And it was speeding from Nicaragua to the United States of America. And it was blown out of the water by the United States of America. I'm not sure exactly which service did it, but it was acting under the authority of the United States government. And a number of people, including some who might surprise you, got very huffy about it. It's an execution. They didn't have due process. And it's not an execution. You don't get due process when you're in international waters. Drug smugglers from Nicaragua have been declared by the President of the United States to be international terrorists. They're on a list of legitimate targets for our military and law enforcement. And that's how you treat targets. You don't negotiate with them. You don't put them up in luxury hotels. You don't ask for their permission to, negotiate. The government, people also have to understand that the government of Nicaragua is in a very bad way. They're in on this. They're part of the cartel operations. They stopped making money with petroleum a while ago. they got used to living very high on the hog in Nicaragua, especially in government. I'm going to take a little bit different tack also.
Okay. So I'm honored today to have with us Ron Coleman. He's an attorney. He's findable pretty much everywhere on X.com. And he's a great man and a knowledgeable, articulate guy, and speaks on a lot of topics regarding First Amendment and free speech and so forth. Right now, I kind of want to veer from some of his wheelhouse items and put him perhaps on shaky ground and on the spot, but I don't think Ron shies away from any of that. Lately we have had some world affairs. So which one would you like to focus on, Ron?
The theme of what's going on right now, and I know that so much has become politicized, but that's because so much has become politicized. I mean, you can't ignore the politics that are injected into what were once basic issues, such as, should we protect our border? Should we put violent people in places where they won't hurt other people? Should we allow people to defend themselves from violence? These are not supposed to be partisan issues, but they have become partisan and really cynically compartmentalized issues. I mean, think of the action that was taken against the Nicaraguan terrorists, right, who were blown out of the water by U.S. authorities. These guys are designated terrorists. They are seen packing their boat with fentanyl. Very dangerous stuff is fentanyl. It kills hundreds of thousands of Americans. I don't have to tell you this because you're an expert on drug addiction. They're sailing to America in a really fast boat. And the response to the interdiction and destruction of this boat by civil libertarians is, I don't think they had their due process. Dude process this. They're in international waters. They're terrorists. They don't get due process. There's no question that this was legal and that this legal lethality was good policy. And the only way you can object to it is, well, there are two possibilities. Anything Trump does is wrong, or anything America does is wrong. So if you're in the anything America does wrong is category, then you would have made the same complaint if Joe Biden had authorized this. I guess we'll never know because Joe Biden didn't do a damn thing to stop people from running drugs into the United States. And if, on the other hand, your complaint is with anything America does is wrong, then why do I care what you have to say? In fact, I was at the National Conservatism Conference last week in Washington, D.C., where I had the privilege to speak. And my video came out just today. And there was another panel on, my panel was a lawyer panel, legal issues. There was a panel about international affairs, and the question is, what's the Trump doctrine? What does America first mean? What is, this is the national conservatism. The premise of the conference is we accept the premise of nationalism and we are conservatives. And one of the speakers gets up there and says, yeah, we're moving from a multipolar, from a bipolar world. The U.S. with the fall of the Soviet Union, we moved from a bipolar world to a unipolar world, and the U.S. is not handling that well. And I asked a question. I said, well, wait a minute. And it's not handling it well, but it has to realize that it can't maintain its hegemony forever. I said, okay, well, first of all, what does forever mean? The Roman Empire lasted for 800 years. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but it's true that nothing lasts forever. But the fact that something is in the process of struggling with hegemony doesn't mean that it's inevitable that it's going to come to an end. But let me first, before I ask my real question, let me ask you, do you or do you not consider that it's the best interest of the people of the United States for the United States to be the global hegemon, to be the most powerful country in the world? And he said, no. I said, well, then I don't have a follow-up question for you. I mean, if you don't even accept the premise that Americans benefit from America being the strongest country in the world, we're not having the same conversation. That's really what's going on under here, though. People who object to the destruction of the Nicaraguan smuggling operation want America. There's no other way to describe it. They want America to be enfeebled. They don't want American interests to be asserted and that assertion to be acted on with any degree of force by the United States government. That is the agenda. There's no other way, I think, to realistically look at it. When you look at the beliefs, I mean, often these people who take these positions will say, no, this is how America is going to be great. Diversity is our strength, that kind of thing. It's never true. It's never true. If you just line up all their positions, they're always positions that tend toward the enfeebling and the reduction in power of the United States. That deals with both external enemies and internal enemies. I mean, the stuff that's coming out of the Justice Department now is mind-boggling. And this, people want justice. This terrible stabbing that happened in Charlotte. We went through Charlotte. Charlottesville was last cycle. And Charlotte was horrific. But frankly, as a New Yorker, this kind of stuff happens a lot. I mean, I think people are shocked that it's happening outside of major cities. It's like not a particularly unusual story that someone has been arrested multiple times and is out on the street just killing people. There's clearly a racial component to the murder, but what you find when you see what happened here is that an utterly incompetent, unqualified person was given the responsibility to make a decision with respect to the disposition of this person who had repeatedly been arrested, who was not supposed to be out on the streets at all, who it was just there's a real sense that there's no law enforcement, that there's no accountability, there's no competence, there's nobody watching. So that's internal, it's external, it goes to, I mean, everything, it's all the same issue, just in different forms. You have all these courts who are now just giving the finger to the Supreme Court. U.S. district courts being told once, twice, three times, no, you can't issue that injunction, and they just issue it again. And there's no sense of accountability. This is ripping the shred of trust and stability in our society. And it's affecting everyone. The only people who are in on this, the only people who are comfortable with this kind of behavior are people, actually, one of the other speakers, I mean, I wasn't a plenary speaker, I spoke on a panel. One of the plenary speakers he actually spoke at the concluding dinner, Seb Gorka. And he said, we get all hung up on ideology and with terminology. People, what kind of conservative is this? Is it a national conservative? Is he a neo-conservative? He said, this is just nonsense. The people coin terms in order to justify their academic, niches. He said, really, there are two kinds of people in the world. People who are accountable, people who are not accountable. And the people who are not accountable are the ones who want to promote all these high sounding to them. They don't sound high to most people with common sense, but all these, let's call them idealistic, let's call them progressive policies, where other people, usually people who are privileged by virtue of being a member of a racial or other kind of class, are to be deemed unaccountable for their actions. But all the rest of the world, people like you and me, are going to continue to be accountable. He said national conservatism, in his view, was about an ongoing effort to focus on making people accountable and making accountability a cornerstone of policy. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I used to have, back in the hashtag days of Twitter, one of my favorite hashtags, along with journalism, it was no accountability. There is just this sense that people in government and people who influence government are simply never held responsible for their actions, for their mistakes, for their negligence, for their malfeasance. That is the kind of thing that undermines institutions, undermines societies, and that's what we're experiencing right now. It's a crack up, and a lot of it is coming to light because of the change of regime that we experienced in January. Thank God.
That's amazing. I think you've you and Sebastian Gorka have hit the nail on the head about accountability, and what we're noticing is a total difference in it. And people act and they react according to what the rules are and what the statutes are. People are clever. Animals are clever. They get away with what they can get away with. There are loads of cute animal videos, dog videos, and whatnot. A guy comes home and everything's all over the place, and he looks at these dogs, and one dog's kind of like, like, no pun intended, like a hang dog expression, and the other one's kind of like, glaring at him, like they know the score. Guilt and accountability are really, and fairness. I think this all comes into the concept of fairness. This is one of my favorite videos. Really, maybe says a lot about me. I don't know about the video, but there's like three or four toads. These are tiny little frog things, right? And they're this big. Whoops, they're this big, and there are four of them. And a guy, puts a piece of a worm or in front of them all, and they're all kind of like, they do this quick stare at each other. And there's four of them. They all know how to get the worm. It's just sitting there dead in front of them. But they can't figure out how to divide it or something. I mean, I don't know what's going through their head. They're toads. But all of a sudden, one, grabs the thing and it's gone. And the other three attack him. Now, there was no right answer for this because the guy should have put four worms down, right? But my only point is that the toad's brain is tiny. And so it's a tiny little thing, and that's just like, and our brains, like phylogeny, ontogeny follows phylogeny. Basically, we develop kind of, embryologically, we all kind of veer off. We don't veer off from the same thing, but that little kind of piece of our animal brain is still there. We are into fairness, and we don't see fairness. We have the same reaction that those little toads do, except magnified, and so.
No, I mean, and what the left does is play on that. They turn that into grievance. In other words, look, someone's getting more than you. Well, they don't say, well, we were all on the log together, and the one who got more than you was the one who snapped up the worm. It's more like, let's get the guy who has more than us. And that, that's not really a basis for a productive use of a way to build a society.
I mean, a lot of us are waiting for accountability for COVID, for the elections, for the January 6th overkill. I think I don't know what's happening. It's what is it? The hands of justice move slowly. I mean, you don't want kind of like peremptory, premature, or whatever, prosecutions. But what's going on as far as your ears to the tracks?
I do think things are happening. I mean, I understand from people like Mike Davis and others who are close to people who make decisions that things are moving, things are happening. I mean, Harmy Dillon, my former partner, and colleague, and friend, she is beginning to make people account for their conduct with respect to somewhat less acute issues. The discrimination against non-minorities and all the nonsense that's been going on with DEI and that sort of thing. When it comes to prosecutions, that is a little bit, as you point out, you don't want it done sloppily. Just because the Democrats have done things in a sloppy way and in a way that, as we're seeing, really has led to a lot of what they were trying to do not to work or to be undone very readily. We're trying to do it, our side. My understanding is that the things that are underway are going to be more attenuated in terms of timing, but they're going to be they're going to be very well planned out. A hint in this direction is the success that the Trump administration has had with the Supreme Court. 18 wins, 0 losses. Now, in February and March, everybody was just up in arms about what's going on with the courts now because the courts have been terrible. Why doesn't the Supreme Court step in? Why does the Supreme Court move by such half measures? Those are all legitimate questions, and I'm not sure that the answers to them were adequate. But it is pretty clear that these were all strategies that were well thought out, and many of them, I believe, were developed by my other former partner, David Warrington, who's White House counsel. There is a lot to be said for moving in a deliberate and careful way so that you win, so that you, instead of being first, you're last. You want to be the one with the last word. A lot of what, and again, sticking with the lawfare stuff, a lot of what these judges are doing is so over the top, so sloppy, and so obviously wrong that they're really setting up these incredible targets for judicial review, for appellate review, that is establishing precedent that is far better than it would be if they weren't so, when I say they, if the left-wing activist judges weren't so desperate to act quickly and act extremely. So slow and steady wins the race. It's really important that things get done before the midterms for 2 reasons. One is that if we lose the House, which I don't think we will, but if we were to lose the House, then we lose a lot of the power to effectuate the change that we want to see. And the other one is, I think we have less of a chance of losing the House if we really make changes. If the things that we need to get done will get done, that will be politically good for the Republicans and for the United States of America. And all those things, going back to our theme, really do relate to accountability. And you're right. There are going to have to be indictments. There are going to have to be arrests. There are going to have to be perp walks for all this political stuff by then. And there will be. I mean, it's a long, I do a show with George Mulhope on Tuesday nights, and he's known as George the Giant Slayer on YouTube. And he brings on Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen Reports. And Mark is a very insightful guy. he tends, he's a pollster, so I think he gets a little jumpy over things. Look, this is what's happening. This is, Epstein is going to kill Trump. The Epstein stuff is killing Trump. I don't think so. But we were talking about this last night. I mean, you do have to look at the long run, and I think the accountability stuff is really going to pay off.
So it seems like a lot of our institutions have been corrupted.
Yeah.
Are there enough soldiers in the Justice Department to listen to the new generals? A, and B, side question, similar perhaps, is all these kind of like rando judges and magistrates who are ruining the place. I mean, the Charlotte killer was let loose 14 times, and I saw a collection, a motley crew, a motley collection of these magistrates. I guess a lot of them didn't go through law school. I'm not sure that makes you a better person per se. If your morals and scruples and you're on the payroll, whatever, or you're just letting some BLM ideology run your day, anyway. But as for two kind of legalistic questions is one, are the rank and file, and I emphasize the word rank, aspects of the Justice Department, can they be formed into a reasonable army, or do you have to get rid of them and put in a new bunch of of recruits? A, and B, ditto all these ramifications and permutations and percolations through the Justice Department, which is unfortunately becoming an oxymoron, untrue to its name. There's a lot of problems in justice with injustice. And if these judges are still kind of like the circuit judges, what all that stuff, shooting from the hip, and then on the smaller level, magistrates, whatever, let this Charlotte killer ultimately out multiple times. Who polices the police? Who judges the judges?
Well, this is as you said in the beginning of your question, the systems have been profoundly corrupted. There was once. Let's put it this way: we should never be unrealistic about what the past was like, or necessarily nostalgic. In fact, when on my panel, someone asked me, to talk about how the quality of judging has declined, and I did. And then my friend, another panelist, Ted Frank, said, "Well, I don't think actually, Ron. I think that the quality of judges might actually have improved since we entered the profession 30 or 40 years ago. We tend to forget that there have always been really bad judges." And I don't think most people agree with Ted. But the thing about Ted is that he's in the courts a lot. So I give him the benefit of the doubt that he's onto something. Having said that, I do think there was a sense of shame and a sense of self-respect that is gone from a lot of institutions. Not only the judiciaries, both state and federal, but also the political entities that staff the judiciary. So you can put someone, and remember, you use the term magistrates. People should not be confused. These are state magistrates that we're talking about in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. It's a term that I don't think a lot of states use the term magistrates. Usually when you hear that term used, it's referring to federal magistrates, which are sort of assistant judges that are not approved by the Senate. They have sort of housekeeping responsibilities, and that's true also in the North Carolina state system. It is and remains an open question, at least to me, why the killer in Charlotte, why his disposition was subject to the decision of, basically a night court judge. I mean, it seems like he was involved in a felony, in many felonies beforehand. So isn't there a point where regular judges are getting involved? I don't know how their system works. But, Obama brought a Chicago style of politics and government operations into the federal government, which is based on infiltrating every institution, squeezing it for everything you can possibly get in terms of self-interest, in terms of graft. And that's the model that we're operating on now. And part of what makes it so much worse is that the press has abandoned any illusion of or pretense of objectivity. Like, there's no one talking about these things, or if they are talking about them, no one's saying, hey, this is a systemic problem.
Yeah.
And until they do, and I say no one, I mean, if you go to NatCon, then you will hear people who are talking about it. But, and you and I are talking about it.
Yeah, I would just stipulate one minor objection, if I may, Your Honor. Allowed? Thank you. I think Chicago is falsely impugned for this. I don't think there's anything unique about Chicago and the Chicago style per se. I think it happens everywhere in urban areas. I think it's probably happened in Baltimore, St. Louis. You pick the city, all that kind of stuff. I actually think Obama is not a Chicago style politician per se. I think he is a seditious Alinskyite. I think he grew up as a red diaper baby. His actual or father, either his father figure in Franklin Marshall Davis or his actual father in Franklin Marshall Davis, you pick, doesn't matter to me, was a known communist and hung out, was from Philadelphia and hung out in Honolulu, and that was like the family friend. And there's a whole story there. I'm not going to go re-litigate it and whatnot, but I think Obama is a Honolulu boy, went to nice private high school, Panahoot and whatnot. He didn't grow up on the streets of Chicago, and he never really had a Chicago political career per se. He was kind of like, glided, or the skids were greased for him to be onto bigger and better things for whatever reason. So I think he's kind of like a Manchurian candidate aspect, and for whatever reason. So I think he has a deep hole in his heart, or whatever you want to call it, and it's been filled with a lot of communist gibberish. The Barack Obama Sr. was a Marxist economist. Whether that's the real dad or not, we'll leave that aside. But then Stanley, Ann Dunham, who names a kid Stanley? I don't know, as a girl, but leave that aside. Quasi-stripper, socialist, wannabe, communist, whatever. Stanley Ann Dunham went on to Barry Soetoro, whatever his name is, something Soetoro, who's the Indonesian Marxist economist. So she went from one to the other, God bless her. And so, this is a confused kid. Okay. He doesn't know who he is. He spends his time in Indonesia. He's going to madrasa. He's quasi-Muslim, quasi who knows what. And he's looking for himself, and he finds himself in the hands of, as the clay of Jeremiah Wright and a fair number of other, probably, anti-American, whatever you want to call it, black nationalists and so forth. And they used him, along the Joe Biden formulation of, oh my God, here we found an articulate black kind of thing. Right. It's a sad, kind of, weird, what is left-handed compliment kind of thing. But I think it was acknowledged that here we have somebody who is the perfect Manchurian candidate. He speaks well. He was Occidental college, and then Columbia maybe, and whatever, all this kind of stuff. And he gets groomed every step of the way. Everybody in all these places, he becomes the leftist, vessel upon which they can form and pour all their anti-American ideas. So I don't think it's a Chicago thing at all. I think it's a different kind of thing. It's a Sorosian, George Schwartz, that guy from Budapest, and George Soros and whatever. I think money and attention went into him through, the likes of Bill Ayer and all this kind of stuff. There's a whole, catalog of things running from the SDS and the Weather Underground and whatnot, which wound up, into Barack Obama. And it's mixed in with a lot of Muslim friendly stuff. He had this, Palestinian, kind of Edward Said kind of colleague out in Chicago. They poured money. They got him at ground zero. So I think he's a construction of a lot of people who have formed this anti-American thing because they're not, some of them are Marxists, some of them are Islamists, whatever. But they're united in the fact they want this whole contraption, the United States of America, to go down. And so I don't think that's Chicago per se. I would rather have any of the dailies daily. I would daily take dailies over this, the Chicago kind of thing. And we've had them here in Boston. We've had the Chicago style politicians. We had Kevin White, and we had Flynn, and we had Marty Walsh. And these are kind of like regular guys who are kind of like lunch pail corruptocrats. And I would take the regular corruptocrat over the seditious type. And maybe I'm misusing the word. You tell me. But I think I think it's all a misnomer to call it the Chicago style of politics. I think it's an Alinsky aspect, and it goes really at the core of bringing down the American experiment.
I think that it's a great point, Randy, and I would agree with everything you said.
Could you write that down? Could you write that down? Let me give that to my wife.
It's recorded.
All right. Well, we have nothing else to say.
We have plenty to say.
So I'm going to turn our focus, our armaments in a way, towards this concept of the Tren de Aragua narco boat to getting threats. And why is it only the right thing if Obama drones somebody, even in U.S. citizens, that Awalaki guy or whatever, in Yemen or someplace in Sudan or whatever, but we can't do it in the Gulf of what is that Gulf called? I forget. Gulf of America.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, that one. So I mean, it's actually an interesting question because it used to be the Arabian Gulf, then it became the Persian Gulf. So it actually kind of mimics. So it's okay in whatever that Gulf is called, but not in whatever this Gulf is called. So to wit, we have seen some interesting times we live in. We've seen some interesting, very quick actions without discussion done by Israel against, Sana'a, however you pronounce the North Yemeni kind of quasi capital, and that Hodeida, whatever the port is on the Houthi branch in northwest Yemen, and all this guys. It's hard to keep up. I can't tell the players without a scorecard, and you can't tell what day it is unless you check the explosion-ometer. But Hamas, there's an old terrible joke. Where did the it's off color, but when the Challenger went, exploded, like, well, where are they going to spend their summer? It's like all over Florida. Well, apparently, I mean, it's been a while. It's a terrible, terrible joke, but apparently a fair number of Hamas are going to spend their days, all over the Gulf.
Right.
So what are those things legal? Is it okay to do that, or do we just kind of look at expedient? And what are the analogies to what happens, say, in you pick a Gulf, in the Gulf of America?
As you point out, people apply standards based on the program that they're reading from. Israel didn't attack Qatar. It attacked people who were in Qatar as guests of the Qatar government. You can have it either way. If they were guests of the Qatar government and they're actively waging war against the state of Israel, which they are. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who denies that Hamas, and these are the leaders of Hamas, was waging war and is waging war against the state of Israel. So that the commanders of an enemy, what do you know?
So this is a side look to our viewers. Ron has a new mysterious camera that will deal with hand gestures. We're not going to have him do any hand gestures right now.
But the problem is, watch this, Ron Coleman is always using hand gestures. Oh, it didn't do it that time, did it? Yeah, it's doing something.
That's an amazing side note.
I might have just turned it off finally. In any event, it's like saying that, the German High Command of World War II is on vacation in Toronto, and because we're not at war with Toronto, or with Canada, we would just let them hang out there and not do anything against in the middle of World War II. These people have expressed legitimate and literally genocidal intentions toward the state of Israel and Jews wherever they can be found. Israel attacks them after they refuse, not that they're considering, after they refuse yet another ceasefire proposal. And that's considered to be a war crime by Macron. But of course, because no country is entitled to the self-defense, look at France. We do not defend ourselves. No? Meanwhile, France has bombed so many countries in the last 20, 30 years. Yeah. They do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, I think it's called a hanging Chad when they do it in Chad.
A little sub-Saharan African
humor. Yeah,
colonial humor there.
Come here to the Randy Bach podcast and you'll get your deep African country puns going on.
Yes. I mean, it's total hypocrisy. Nothing Israel can do is ever right. Just like nothing Trump does is ever right. It's just incredible cynicism. The Israelis have, the irony is that Israel has held back from doing things it could have done in terms of self-help for a very long time, believing that by doing so they were winning credibility points, and they don't. Those points are never there to redeem when anyone's displeased with Israel. The deck is always stacked against them. They really just have to do what is in their national interest.
So I'm going to bring up something that sounds extraneous. I hope it's not too extraneous. So somebody sent me a clip from South Park, and we were on the topic. This is different. We're on the topic of ADHD, attention deficit disorder. And I had written a Substack, and people can find my Substack at Rand Doctor, RINDOCTOR Substack. Anyway, it's about a personal episode where my son, they wanted him to get pills. They wanted him to be on amphetamines. And I don't think there's much use for that. I don't want to get into that topic right now. And he wound up outgrowing his stuff. He speaks fine. He's able to manage himself. He gets all kinds of degrees, all that kind of stuff. So it didn't whatever it was, he outgrew. But somebody sent me this humorous clip from South Park. It's 1 minute long. And Chef, who's a big black character, says, you instead of medicating the kids at your school, you might want to look at this. And he shows a infomercial from a doctor. He's got 3 kids who've got ADD, and they're like, I need more time on the test. He's like, stop it. He yells at him, get back to the test. And the other one is like, but but I want to fidget. He's fidget. He grabs the fidget toy, throws it away, sit down, whatever. And he reprimands all 3 kids, and they're all like wind up studying. And because of South Park, he whacks one across the head. So I might as well mention that. And, it's nothing you really want to see in school, disclaimer. On the other hand, that aspect of is a similar Bob Newhart thing, when a woman comes in with OCD and she's like, I have to keep doing what I'm doing. I have to keep doing. She's like, stop it. She says, I'm going to give you quick advice. It's not going to take an hour. Stop it. She's like, what? Stop what? Stop it. Just stop doing it. And then he yells at her, whatever. And then she's like, oh, and she gets, my only point is that people, we all love to react to kindness. I like to compliment people now and then and so forth. But it's also, it's a double-edged sword that the kindness is okay, but it can't be exclusive. And people need to understand their limits. And when they do, again, as far as the Middle East goes, you literally have a line in the sand. And some things are tolerated and tolerable, and some things are not. And Gaza has not had the accountability thing for quite some time. And even now, they don't have the full accountability thing because, every other country, if something happens to Sudan, it's a big open playground. They wind up in Ethiopia or whatever. I mean, it's like nobody likes this kind of stuff, but there's all kinds of flux of refugees getting back to Chad and in Libya. People are kind of swarming and they're voting with their feet or getting put away with their around whatnot. But somehow you're talking about different standards. Israel has this war, but they're purposely handcuffed. They're watched by ultra scrutiny you don't see in Sudan war or the Syria war. You can kill like 1 million people in Syria, nobody nearly knows. You can kill literally 1 million people in Sudan, nobody like loses sleep. People are slaughtered in Nigeria, Boko Haram. Nobody ever hears that. Doesn't wind up on the UN floor. And so there's kind of like this double, triple, I don't know how many standard, but we'll just stick with double standard of those who are there's an old joke, people fall into 2 categories: people who fall into categories and people who don't. But there's a lot of people who they just don't even fall into categories. They're not even on our we consider them like way beneath our scrutiny, and we don't even have any expectation of their living up to the standards that we all put Israel to every day, or the United States, or whatever. And it's like, but that is only there to wit my earlier point about bringing the government down. And so the only reason those standards are held up to unequally is to get that object, the Zionist entity or the U.S. entity, little Satan, big Satan. And that just seems to me an endless bit of show theater, which has been very, very successful until the part where it bites them in the ass. I think all the places in Europe that have said, oh, we want the 2-state solution. We want one state of Israel and one other state that wants to kill Israel. It's like, the PLO and Hamas have one major disagreement about Israel. Like Hamas wants to, slaughter them all and throw them out to the sea. And a PLO, that's what the PLO wants to do. And Hamas wants to torture them first. So it's like, where do you go with this kind of stuff? Nobody would tolerate this on their own border. And historically, nobody ever did.
Well, except that now Western Europe does tolerate it within their own borders. And that's, they have been applying the double standard to Israel for a generation. But now it's going to be that much worse because their governing coalitions and their electorates are rich with Muslims. And that's just part of the decision making now. You make a very good point about accountability. The Hamas guys, all the other examples, if you lose a war, you have to surrender because otherwise it's going to get worse for you and maybe you're going to get killed. The guys who make the decisions for Hamas are at no risk of getting killed, or at least they were until 2 days ago. So they had no incentive. See, usually you think, well, leaders are looking out for their people. These people absolutely do not care how many Palestinians die. The Israelis care about Palestinian deaths immensely more than Hamas leaders do, because if Israel didn't, it would have just simply leveled the whole place 2 years ago. The Hamas leaders have no accountability because they're in Qatar.
Well, not only that, I think the press holds them to a different standard.
Absolutely.
Whatever that thing is, the press, the UN, all this kind of like,
the blob, the press,
the cabal blob, whatever. So we're kind of rounding out our hour here, and I'm grateful for your time, but I'm not sure I can afford the legal hour. So tell us some parting thoughts, and what is while I have you, I know you're not an international law guy. What is a letter of marque, M-A-R-Q-U-E, whatever it is?
Well, a government under international law can authorize private parties to take certain kinds of action against pirates and against people who are deemed to be in violation of international norms on the sea. So it's a kind of way of outsourcing law enforcement or nautical law enforcement. It's not really something that makes as much sense in an era of, the United States Navy having the sort of ability that it does, and other legal resources. People like to use the term and to allude to the term in order to remind people that historically governments have been unsparing in the tools and resources that they would devote to getting rid of scourges like Nicaraguan in international waters.
Yeah. All right. Well, perfect. Thank you for all this.
Well, you're welcome.
So I'm going to give you one conclusory sentence or paragraph. Send all. So what's the how would you summarize our talk or your thoughts or advice?
We are in a transitional period. I think that many of the abuses that took place over the last 8 years or 12 years, arguably 16 years of government leadership are being undone by this administration. But we have no guarantee of permanence. Some of the changes that are being undone, I think, are going to be very hard to restore. Others will be easy to restore. But I think the rules of the game have changed in a way that will be irreversible. We really need the process to continue, and I'm confident that everyone involved on our side is well aware of that. And the good news is, besides that, what I just said, that the other side can't get out of its own way. Because being a leftist only involves, being a Democrat only involves strategies designed to attain and retain power. There is never any philosophical or ideological limiting principle on what they will either support or defend. Anything goes. Anything goes. That's going to turn off more and more of the electorate as more and more of the radical conduct resulting in tragedy that is a result of their policies becomes apparent. So I think we've got a pretty good shot at making this stick.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it, Counselor. Go out, keep going out there and doing your superhero work. We'll be watching.
Here I come to save the day. Randy, may I talk to you again?
Thank you so much. Have a great. Bye-bye.